Today's question is, what event changed your way of thinking permanently?
I grew up in a really abusive house where almost every move I made was deemed a mistake, and I was usually screamed at or even beaten because of it. It makes one paranoid to even try the simplest thing lest you fail, and pretty much stop attempting anything. I was 22 and had just become an electrical apprentice. I'm female, by the way. I was definitely not in a good place. Frankly, this was a desperation job. It was my last hope at building a life, and I was at the point where I would have off-ed myself if things didn't work out. It's a bit of a story, but I wound up working at an electrical company. I was hired as an electrical apprentice and knew absolutely nothing about electrical. I was put through our company's boot camp in our prefab shop to get me up to speed, which was pretty intense. I think it was the second day. We were combining rolls of wire to make pipe runs faster/easier, combining black, red, and blue wires from single spools onto one spool, for example. After seeing I got the gist, the foreman running the shop walked away for a bit to take care of a few things. In the meantime, I was left to combine spools to send out to job sites. Well, I got through combining a group of spools into one big spool, and only at the end did I realize I had added one too many wires onto the spool, so it wasn't right. I completely panicked. I honestly expected to get screamed at and fired because I screwed up. This sort of reaction to a mistake on my part was my normal. I stood there in full panic mode about what to do. He came back in after a minute or two and saw I wasn't working and asked why. I wound up fessing up, body tense, completely expecting the worst, and he just looked at me confused and said, "So what? If you make a mistake, then you just fix it." So we fixed it. No big deal. Didn't even take 5 minutes. No one in my life, ever, in 22 years, had ever said that to me. I cried so hard for days on after. I spent a solid decade deprogramming so much stuff. I'm 34 now and still catch stuff that I was raised to believe about myself and others. I learned so much and gained so much confidence from having worked there and with those people. I was able to get up the nerve to leave my abusive family behind. I didn't finish my apprenticeship. I'd always wanted to go to college, but had been discouraged. I decided to go back at 24 and moved across country to do it. My life is mine, and it's a happy, if modest, one. And it all started with someone telling me it was all right to make a mistake. I will never forget that, and you shouldn't ever, either. Thanks, Diron. I once read an article about a woman who survived the Holocaust, and she talked about for years all she could smell was rot/filth/burning bodies, so she tried to cover it up with perfume, and even when she wore too much she could still smell it. That made me rethink the way I feel about everything other people do. What if they're trying to escape something so bad it doesn't even cross our minds? Also, I was once in a hellfire. I had my arms full. 2 kids that couldn't walk were tucked under my arms. 1 dog that was following well enough, but I had to keep a hand on, and a terrified dog who I was dragging by the collar. The second dog broke out of my grip and ran back into the house. I couldn't leave 2 babies and the first dog alone outside, especially because it was winter. I was alone, and my body was the only thing keeping the babies warm and the first dog from running away into busy, fast-moving traffic. I couldn't run back into a burning house either. I couldn't grab their leashes either because their leashes were in the room that was on fire. The dog that had ran had found a different way to safety, and the firefighters brought her to me. I now don't ever offer to be alone with more things than I have hands for in case of emergency. However, at another point in my life, people who lived with me owned a bunch of aquarium animals. Like a lot, whose lives depended on the conditions inside those aquariums. Heavy, thick glass things that were like the size of the walls of the rooms. I kept imagining what would have happened if the house fire had happened when those animals were in the house, and that thought process is why I will not own any animal that cannot be safely, for the animal and the people, and easily removed from a building in case of a fire. Getting mugged and beaten up for the first time. It made me realize just how overpowering trauma really is. You could not just be strong and get over it the way I used to think. You can think you are some super strong person, but when something truly traumatic happens to you, it all goes out the window. It was a few guys who were catcalling me and following me around. Then one of them ran up on me when I walked around the corner and beat me up and took my stuff. I had a broken nose and hand and bruises absolutely everywhere. I used to think of myself as a tough girl who would be able to brush off stuff like this, the way you saw in the movies. I got in some minor schoolyard fights which were never anything serious. After I got beaten up, I was shaken so horribly. It permanently changed my mind on how violence affects me. I was scared to walk around in my own neighborhood. I became so much more reclusive for a while because even just taking a walk in my neighborhood made me scared. Even when I tried to be strong, I would still be a shaky, nervous wreck when I was scared. I couldn't control myself from being traumatized, and that was the most important realization. Willpower means practically nothing in the face of trauma. You cannot willpower your way out of a heart rate of 150 and your hands shaking and your words stumbling, your chest hurting, barely able to breathe because you were so paralyzed by fear. Because that is what would happen to me when I was scared. I used to be one of those, you won't have problems with cops if you're not doing anything wrong types of people. Then one Saturday, I was leaving a football game and a guy stole a beer tap handle from a concession stand and got mixed up into the crowd. Some cops saw it happen and thought it was me. 2 cops led me into the on-site holding cell area, where I exercised my First Amendment rights with some vulgarities, and a group of about 5 of them roughed me up pretty good. They eventually let me go, but with a ticket for petty theft and a mandatory court appearance, even though there was no evidence that I had the tap handle. It was just their word against mine. I had to take a PTO day to go to court about a month later. It was in a county about a 90-minute drive from my home. Met with the DA, he went over my case. I was adamant that I was not guilty and wanted to go to trial. The DA explained how expensive and a pain in the ass that is, and potentially risky for me, and said he'd just drop everything from my record if I did some community service. This just opened my eyes to how fucked over people get in our justice system. I was lucky. I had a car, the ability to take a PTO day, no kids to watch, the ability to do some community service in my free time, and petty theft was a pretty minor thing. I just think of the people who get screwed over big time, and it makes me sick to my stomach. Our system sucks. Well, getting older. But I'm sure that's a bit obvious, lol. I would have to say that the event that made the most impact on me was being in sales for 5 years, after thinking that that was what was the best thing for me at the age of 17. Back then, I thought I knew myself and what I wanted. I got my GED and got into sales, where I made the most money I've made in my entire life, basically doubling what my own mother made in a year. However, after about 3 to 4 years, I realized how much I was impacting many people's lives for the worse. It was not something that I wanted to do. It made me think back on the reason I wanted to get into sales in the first place. The reason for me, at the age of 17, was because the amount of money you made was directly correlated to the amount of effort and work you put in. When I work at 100%. There is no better feeling for me, even now, than putting your soul into your work. As I got older and was exposed more and more to the real world, I started thinking about the impact I wanted to have on those around me. This was something I never cared about. Before, I looked at life as if I was the main character, and everyone around me were pieces in a game in which the goal was to be as successful as possible. Eventually, you realize that everyone around you has a life equally complex and nuanced as yours. To them, you are simply a piece as well, and they are also trying to become the best that they can be. I think that my perspective will change again. I'm only 25 now, and I feel like I am learning more about the world than I ever have before, simply because I am looking at it instead of myself. Right now, I am going to college to become a nurse. I will be able to put my 100% into my work, which will directly impact the lives of others and set them on a path towards bettering themselves, rather than taking from them as much as I can get away with. The field is in need of people, and the average nurse is swamped with work. This is encouraging for me because I know I can really put my soul into it and still have work left to do. And this is the end of today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to comment an anecdote or experience similar to the topic of the video. Leave your like. share if you liked the video, and lastly, don't forget to activate the little bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Bye-bye.